I will take
Sure.
1 or 2 minutes to introduce you and Iliyana, and we'll, if you don't mind, we'll wait a couple of minutes since people in Russia are coming with some delay. It's a national habit, unfortunately.
Like in the Balkans and South and Italy as well. So it's not unusual.
Yes, and I just wanted to add that the organizational committee and the co-organizer, the Pushkin State Russian Language Institute, and I'm sure that the University of Moscow and the Institute of Linguistics are especially happy to welcome you and Iliyana in person. We all hope that if the pandemic situation improves and you have some free slot, we'll organize your public lecture in Moscow. So
Thank you very much.
I just confirm our organizational obligations that we have some funding for the accommodation.
Sure. Thank you very much. I actually have a very nice memory of a visit to Moscow that Jura Lander had organized some time ago, actually for a small course in the relation between formal grammar and typology.
Yeah.
And it was very nice to see so many bright, interested students at the Higher School of Economics, but I saw that there are so many other young people in different universities in Moscow and St. Petersburg who I was quite impressed by.
Yes, exactly. And this conference of ours, this series of conferences is exactly about the interaction of language theory and typology. Typology can be different, and typology can be formal, that is either oriented towards formal models, or just interested in checking them and proving or falsifying.
Right.
And Jura Lander was one of the 12 participants who took part in the first typology of morphosyntactic parameters conference in 2011.
Right.
This is the 11th conference right
It's
now.
a very long history now. That's right. Yes, yes.
So there are currently 24 listeners, 2 speakers and 22 listeners. I think I can start introducing our plenary speakers if the audience doesn't mind. So we're extremely happy to welcome Professor Iliyana Krapova and Professor Guglielmo Cinque, both from the University of Venice. We welcome them as plenary speakers, this year plenary speakers, and it is just a high privilege for myself and a privilege for our conference to have such famous linguists here in Moscow, although in Zoom Moscow, unfortunately. Well, just to say a few words about Iliyana. Iliyana Krapova is a leading figure in formal Slavic and Balkanic studies and in general linguistics. She's famous for her papers and books in Bulgarian and Balkanic syntax, sentence cartography, typology of the functional categories. And this joint talk of hers is about a feature which is typologically attested, but deeply rooted in the Balkanic area as well. And Guglielmo Cinque, well, it's hardly necessary to introduce him since he is one of the founders and the living classic of the modern linguistics. He is one of the fathers of the generalized phrase structure hypothesis, or well, not hypothesis, framework, I would say. So if you look at some science metric databases, this is surely not the most important thing, but still you will find thousands of quotations to his books on the positions of adverbs and the a-bar dependencies. And the same can be said about his articles. Every talk and every paper of Guglielmo is an event. The same actually holds for Iliyana's papers and talks. And finally, a few words about their joint presentation. We're extremely happy that you give a joint talk. And we are excited to be present at this talk. So the floor is open. Please, you have more than 1 hour. So I'll just show you, or the organizers will gently remind about the limit, probably 10 minutes before the main talk time ends, and we'll then put a notice like discussion time. But it's up to you how you manage all your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I already thank you for inviting us, and I thank you for the very generous presentations that you gave. So I will start with a brief introduction. Maybe I should put the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Can you do that? Because if we can share.
Yeah.
Iliyana is
Here.
No.
Okay. And this is
yeah.
the beginning.
And then you just slide.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So the title has changed a little bit, but the main contents have remained. I will start with a brief introduction and with the Romance part, and then leave the screen to Iliyana to cover the Slavic and Bulgarian, especially, part. Now, Slavic clitics are usually taken to have two guises, so to speak, to come in two types, namely the clitic second or Bakernagel type, which is found in Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, Czech, Slovenian, and so on, and the adverbal type, which is taken to be the typical clitic type of Bulgarian. Although, as also Professor Zimmerling has shown in many of his works, there is a residue of a second position or Wackernagel position even there. Now, we want to reconsider the alleged adverbal type of clitic in Bulgarian, and in light of the Romance, actually, where two types are generally or have more recently been recognized as being present, namely the case where the clitic makes up a constituent with a verb, it's a purely adverbal, and one type which is separate from a verb, and it's, let's say, not adverbal, but is merged in a particular or in more than one slot within the sentence structure. And Bulgarian turns out, at a closer look, to have an adverbal type, but also the other type that we will try to show, and with a striking parallelism with the Romance type that we are going to illustrate. Now, this will also require us to have a clearer picture of how much the different verbal forms in Bulgarian raise around the adverbs and how they interact with the adverbs that make up part of the clausal structure. But before I come to illustrate the relevant parts of the Romance clitic system, let me mention one more general picture that is in the background, in a sense, of our analysis.
Dear Guglielmo, I'm awfully sorry to interrupt you, but maybe
sure.
Before you start, you can put your presentation in a full screen mode.
Yeah.
In a full screen mode. Let me see if you.
I'm awfully sorry.
No, you did a good job. Is this
great.
Thank
you.
now?
Thank you so much.
Okay, but how can, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. So we saw the plan of the talk, and I was saying that I would like to say two words about some proposal that I made some years ago, because it comes as relevant to understanding better the situation, both in Romance and in Bulgarian. Namely, I had proposed that the different classes of adverbs, namely the aspectual type, the modal type, the tense type, the mood type, come in a rigid sequence or hierarchy. And that this kind of hierarchy or sequence corresponds or is matched by an equally rigid hierarchy or sequence of functional heads that seem to correspond very closely, in fact, almost identically, with the different classes of adverbs. So that you have aspect, you have tense, you have modals, you have mood. And the question is, how do we get to these very rich, which are actually a fragment of even richer hierarchies of these elements? How do we come to establish such hierarchies? And the idea is quite simple, namely, even though no language allows you to have all of the adverbs co-occurring together, some of them are even semantically conflicting, or in the case of functional elements which are either free or bound morpheme on verbs, like an aspect or a tense or a modal, it is possible to come to reconstruct these longer hierarchies or sequences by examining any pair of adverbs or any pair of these functional elements and seeing how they are relatively, how they are ordered relative one to the other. So the crucial thing is that the order of any two of these elements conform to this hierarchy, even though you are never going to see the entire sequence or hierarchy of these elements. Now, this may be controversial, especially in the case of the A or the functional heads of the sentence, because you don't see any language which has a free or bound morpheme expressing every one of the functional elements. But if you look across languages, you can reconstruct this more precise hierarchy, again, by transitivity, by looking at the relative order of these elements. So I introduced this because the lower part of the adverb sequence, namely the aspectual part, will play a very important role both for Romance and for Bulgarian. So let me start with Romance now. Now, in a paper by Beninca and Tortora, they gave evidence that in different Romance varieties, you can have clitics that belong to different slots within the sentence. There is a low slot which is above a couple of adverbs, but is below most of the other adverbs. There is a higher one which is above all of the aspectual adverbs. And then there is a third one, which is still higher, which appears to be found in the CP domain, near the complementizer, preceding the subject. So let me start with the different varieties. Here we will see the first Borgo Manerese, which is in Piedmont, in northwest of Italy. Then we will look at the other northern, central, and southern dialects. Now, it's important to recognize the fact that these are not dialects of Italian. They have a parallel development from Vulgar Latin. So they are on a par with Italian, like French or Spanish, and of course of the varieties that are found in France or Spain. And some of them are even not mutually intelligible one to the other. Especially if you take one from the south and one from the north, they can be totally opaque in their understanding. So they're quite different. Now let's start with Borgo Manerese, which instantiates the lowest slot of clitics. In a very interesting work published by Oxford University Press by Tortora, Tortora, they call it in the States. She's she's teaching in New York. She, in fieldwork, she found out that clitics are found in between the lowest adverbs, and in particular, they come in between. Let me gloss them with English, the corresponding English adverbs. So any more already and the negative adverb mia, but above sempre always, and the manner adverb like badly. This can be garnered by the fact that the clitics can be enclitic to the any more adverb or to the already adverb, or to the negative adverb, or even to the verb if no adverb are present. But this is only a function of the fact that it encliticizes to whatever happens to be before the clitic. But crucially, it can never appear encliticized to always or to badly or well, which means that it's higher up. And that's why it cannot encliticize to these adverbs. So she established that particular position of the clitic in between these aspectual adverbs. Now, there is a second type of variety, Romance variety, which instantiates the middle clitic slot. And these are, interestingly, from the north of Italy, from central Italy, and from southern Italy. Again, not mutually intelligible, and they are Triestino from Trieste, Antrodochese, which is north of Rome, and Cosentino, which is in Calabria, the very point of the of Italy. And here you here you see the clitic, which actually precedes all of the lower aspectual adverbs. The negative, already, anymore, or no longer, still, always, completely. Then you have a very special, like you can see very well in French, il a tout bien fait, where these quantifiers are actually part of the sequence of adverbs. They come in between completely and the manner adverb. And this is true throughout the Romance, with some particular differences that I'm not going to enter now. Now, let's start with Triestino and see very quickly how the clitics are separated from the finite verb. So here the clitic is the reflexive one, and the verb is the present tense, and there is a negative adverb, not even or not at all, in between them. Then you have already, which comes in between the clitic te and the verb, again, the present tense. In C, 5C, you have the clitic separated by always. In D, by nothing, which here is interpreted as not at all. In E, there is another adverb, which means, or quantifier, which means too much. And French trop, again, is found in between, the verb and, so we will see other examples later about French. Here with much separating the clitic from the, so let me go a bit quicker now. In Antrodochese in central Italy, you find virtually the same types of adverbs that separate the clitics and the verb. So again, the negative one, always, sorry, still here, 6b, always, 6c, a lot, tanto, much, in D, a bit, the converse of much, and here again, too much, troppo.
Dear Guglielmo, sorry, we can't see your screen. Can you fix it? We just have a small picture, small icon.
Oh, really?
But cannot read the examples. We can hear them.
But I see. No, it's bad. Let me see how can we do that. We shared it.
You get extra time for the technical pause.
Sure.
Don't be afraid.
Condivisione. Maybe così condividi.
Can you see it better now or not?
Not
No,
yet.
it's just not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so let me. Okay, so let me start sharing again and see what happens. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, probably the question is with the, the examples here. Can you see A, B, C?
Yes.
But not clearly D, E. Okay, now.
Yeah. Okay, so it's better now.
Is it better now? Can you see now better? They don't hear.
Yes.
Okay, so we took out your screens so that they were overlapping part of the examples maybe. So I was just going through the Antrodochese, which showed the same kind of adverbs, and Cosentino, the southern Italy dialect from Calabria. Again, you find even 3 of them. This is from an article by Ledgway from Cambridge and Lombardy. They both worked on these dialects. You even find 3 different adverbs in between a clitic. And can you see the arrow that I am moving or not?
The mouse, yes.
The mouse. Can you see my arrow?
Yes.
Okay. So again, the clitic is here. The verb, the finite verb is here. Now here you have So here you have negative, anymore, always. Here the clitic is before already, always, and then the verb. Here is still, he, but crucially they show that well and again cannot intervene, and for the very good reason that the verb has to cross over the very lowest ones, like well, again, early. We'll see that in Bulgarian too. And that's very, I mean, these are the very lowest spectral adverbs that in many languages are crossed over. Now, so that gives more or less the idea of what kind of adverbs can come in between. And French shows the same thing with only two clitics, actually, en et I. The other, I mean, the direct object clitic or the indirect object clitic cannot be separated from the infinitival verb. They have to be adjacent. They can be shown to form a constituent with the infinitival verb. That's the second option that clitics have at their disposal, to form a constituent with the verb. But en and he, in non-colloquial French at least, can be separated. And here you see the separation of en in 9a and I in 9b from the infinitive by the negative adverb pas. In 10a and 10b, you see separated by already. In 11a and b by anymore, plus. In 12a by always, toujours. And then complètement, 13a and b, the minor adverb, bien, in 14. And again, trop, too much. But 16 and 17 show what I already said, namely that the dative clitic or the object clitic cannot be separated from the infinitive. So it's only a property of en and I that can be separated and even undergo some kind of clitic liming in certain varieties. Now, the third, you remember the three slots that clitics can occupy in the structure of the clause. The third is the highest, and it's found only in medieval Western Romance varieties and in modern Galician and Portuguese, which are typically verb second, but generally verb second, although they allow some kind of verb in situ. And here, with the case of verb in situ, you actually see the clitics being before the subject. So you say something like, for the better accomplish that it, she not ordered, where it precedes the subject. And the same is true in 18b from Galician, where her comes before the subject and follows something that is clearly in CP because it's a exclamative WH phrase. So these are the three cases of clitics that can stand alone, not being adverbal. But in addition to that, Romance languages, in particular Italian, does not have the first type. We only have adverbal clitics, for example, and other Romance varieties do the same. So now I'm going to go very fast over the second type, where the clitic forms a constituent with the different verbal forms, and we will look at briefly at gerundive in the progressive periphrasis, active past participles, infinitivals, and finite forms. Now, here A and B show the case of a constituent made up by the clitic plus the verb. Here it's a gerundive. In 20a, it's a Brazilian Portuguese, where the clitic is actually proclitic to the gerundive. Italian only has the clitic in enclisis, so what we see in the structure below is the idea, there is not a long enough arrow, but that the verb actually crosses over the clitic, which you see in Brazilian Portuguese, and so it becomes enclitic in Italian. But what is crucial to show that they form a constituent here is the fact that they can move together, clitic plus verb, around the aspectual adverbs. Here, Brazilian Portuguese differs slightly from Italian in having to raise this constituent, clitic plus gerundive, not only above early, well, everything, completely, and everything, but also above completely, although as the dashed lines under always, still, anymore, and already should show that they can, that the constituent can raise even above them, but only optionally. The solid line shows the obligatory movement, the dashed line, the optional movement of the constituent clitic plus gerundive. Italian is slightly different, as you see from 22, in that the same constituent only has to raise above early, well, and everything, but can only raise optionally above the higher ones, aspectual ones. Now, the active past participle, now here we have the San Valentinese, which is the in Abruzzo over here. And here it's the two possibilities, proclitic and enclitic, are found with the same verbal form. With active past participle can be preceded or followed. But once again, they move together as a constituent because they have to precede well and everything, although, as the dashed line show here, they can only optionally raise above always, still, anymore, already. The infinitive, again, we compare French with Italian. French has proclitics to the infinitive, Italian has only enclitics to the infinitive. And again, the idea is that they start out similarly, but Italian has to move around the clitic, the infinitival verb. But what, again, is crucial is that they move as a constituent, whether the sequence is clitic infinitival or infinitival clitic, it's a constituent. And that raises around obligatorily in French around to early, but only optionally around the higher ones. In fact, it cannot even raise above the negative element. And for some people, not even above already and anymore, but only above toujours, always. Italian, on the other hand, moves the infinitival not only above, as you see the solid line here, obligatorily over all of the aspectual adverbs, but even above the higher mood, modal, and tense adverbs that are not indicated here. So it moves very high, even higher than finite verbs. Very striking. Finally, the case of the finite verb, again, San Valentinese, which shows once again that it has a constituent where the clitic precedes or follows the finite verb. And again, it raises to the same height as the other case that we saw. Now, to conclude, so putting together Beninkai Tortora's three free clitic zones and the clitic positions that are merged with each verbal form, one arrives at the different possibilities illustrated in 28 here, it's not 19. Activated or not activated, depending on the language and on the specific verbal form. The constituent clitic verb or verb clitic can raise then to different positions within the adverbial sequence, which is not shown here. And if we were to take into account clitic climbing, there would be even more positions that the constituent clitic plus verb can actually take. Anyway, now I leave the screen and the floor to Iliyana for the comparison with Bulgaria.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Now let's move now to Bulgarian. I am not going to start discussing clitics I will discuss them in a while, because in light of what Guglielmo said about the rigid ordering of adverbs and the verb movement around them in terms of various possibilities as they are illustrated for romance vis-a-vis the clitic positions, I think that the same preliminary work is also necessary to be done for Bulgarian before we can cope successfully with the complex question of where clitics are and to understand better their syntax. Now, this is a preliminary ordering of adverbs that we arrived at while working on this topic. Now, you see various adverbs above the VP, and these are all the aspectual adverbs which I followed Guglielmo's notations here, which sometimes maybe are somewhat descriptive, but even so, even if that is the fact, they are useful to distinguish the various adverbs one from the other in terms of relative height. So we see the aspectual adverbs, and then we see the tense anterior, which is the perfect tense, which Bulgarian grammars usually refer to as past perfect, and the corresponding adverbs in terms of height. So this portion is, so to speak, the lower portion of the adverbial grid. Now, how do we derive the adverbial hierarchy for Bulgarian? It can be reconstructed, as Guglielmo mentioned in the beginning, by considering the relative order of two adverbs when putting them together. Of course, it is not possible to put any two adverbs of the hierarchy together, as some combinations are impossible. For example, never cannot combine with often, but transitivity helps, as he explained, in the sense that if a certain adverbial A precedes B and B precedes C, then by transitivity we get A preceding C. What these examples in 30 and 31 show is that Bulgarian finite verbs, and we start with finite verbs, actually move across the adverbs veche, poveche, which, remember, are on the higher edge of the lower aspectual hierarchy, and they can also appear in couples sometimes, like, for example, veche, poveche. And given that this is the only available combination in which veche precedes poveche, then we can infer that already is situated higher than poveche. And the same is true for the combination vinagi napolno, which in the opposite order is impossible. Now, like I said, movement of the finite verb, we can see from the examples that the finite verb actually moves above the lowest adverbs of the hierarchy, and these are rano, early, and the manner adverb dobre, so that the adverb appears post-verbally. Well, it can also appear pre-verbally, as 32a and 32b show, but in this case it needs to be focused. We try to abstract away from focalized adverbs because we believe that such adverbs are not indicative of the neutral order of the adverbials with respect to the verb, but they are somewhere higher, we don't know where, but somewhere higher, presumably for information purposes. And now the fact that Rano in its non-focalized reading post-verbal position can combine with another focalized phrase, but not when it is preposed, actually shows that the neutral order is verb Rano. So you cannot combine a focalized pre-verbal adverb with another focus phrase, which in this case is only during the week. And the same is true for 33, where we see that other adverbs, which also make part of this lower aspectual field, like mnogo, napełno, a lot, napełno, completely, always, often. In fact, always, often is also possible as a combination, but not in the opposite way. And we see that when they follow, they respect the order, the expected order, but when they precede, they have to be focalized. Another thing which I need to mention is that the finite verbs in Bulgarian do not move higher than this lower aspectual field. So if we take a model adverb like вероятно or my, perhaps, then we see that they necessarily precede. So той вероятно не пуши, той май пуши. And the same for speech act adverbs like честно казано. Okay, so this in 36 is the relative order, and we see that the verb actually stops at this cutoff point, which is above the already and more the two aspectual adverbs. Now, let's move now to the participle. And we now start with the active L participle, which participates together with an auxiliary verb in a compound verb combinations. This is where we are going to test later on the position of the clitics. And this is the past tense that Bulgarian grammars refer to, past anterior tense. Беше станал, had risen. Now, what we see here is that the situation is different in terms of raising of the participle. Now, we see that participles raise obligatorily, but much less. So in 37 and 38, we see that they cannot move above rano, the two lowest adverbs, rano and dobre. But from the examples in 39, 40, 41, and 42, we see that the participle actually can move optionally above the higher portion of the lower aspectual field. I give you here examples, so you can say in Bulgarian, той беше винаги живял, той беше живял винаги, опуре, той беше напълно прозрял, completely understood, прозрял напълно, и той беше вече пратил вече, той още не беше излязъл, etc. So both combinations are actually possible. And now, using the same dotted line graphic, I actually show here that the obligatory raising above the lowest, rano and dobre, and then the optional raising above the other aspectual adverbs. Now, passive participles, this is just an aside. Interestingly, and this is why I wanted to mention it, that they don't appear to move, or at least they move even less than their English counterparts, which are well known to optionally raise above well and early. In Bulgarian, however, the participle is found to the right of these two adverbs. Okay, so now let's move to the question of Bulgaria clitics. Clitics, let me say, as an introduction, I haven't put this on the slide, but they are extremely difficult to study, and notoriously, we can say difficult, because as Frank's 2017 has aptly put it, clitics are deficient in terms of both lexical, semantic, prosodic, and syntactic respect. So they do not have lexico-conceptual features, they do not express any syntactic syntactic complexity, and that's why they are usually argued to be non-branching categories, even though some treatments, in some treatments they are heads, and in other treatments they are XPs. But this again goes together with the fact that they are non-branching, even if they are acknowledged to be XPs. Now, Bulgarian clitics, as Guglielmo said, are usually considered verb-adjacent clitics, with the notable exception of Anton Zimmerling's work, which I will refer to in the end. But the general received wisdom is that they are verb-adjacent, and that they are clearly to be contrasted with second position clitics in West and South Slavic languages, which strictly obey the so-called Wackernagel's law. Many people have worked on clitics, so I just give some of the references. So 45 and 46 are respectively from Bulgarian and Serbo-Croatian. And the Bulgarian example, Vera včera, this is a famous example, mi go dade, has the clitics, the pronominals, dative and accusative, which always go together in all Slavic languages and are immutable in terms of height. So first dative and then accusative, and followed by the verb. Even if we make a word order change, like, for example, put the adverb včera in the beginning, again we see that the clitic cluster precedes the finite verb. Not so in Serbo-Croatian, where clitics are shown to be second position, and this is a standard truth, in that they have to follow the first constituent, whatever it is, whether it is a subject or jučer, an adverb like yesterday. Okay. Now, Harizanov has formulated the following generalization, which, as we will see, is partly true. Now, his generalization is that clausal clitics are left adjacent to the highest verb in the clause, unless this leaves them in CP initial position, in which case they are right adjacent to the highest verb. Now, 47 is an illustration of this second case, and given that Bulgarian clitics need some kind of support on their left, which is standardly known as an effect Tobler-Musafia. They cannot be initial in their prosodic domain. So 47 illustrates that a verb can move up to the left of the clitic in order to support them. This is usually considered some sort of last resort operation, and this is usually done in prosodical, in prosody, in the PF component of grammar. Our goal, however, here is to show that Bulgarian has two types of clitics. We still believe that it is somewhat early to identify the precise position of clitics, because a lot of preliminary work needs to be done, especially in order to understand 47, which is the most difficult structure. But we want to have a more modest goal and show that Bulgarian has two types of clitics. Clitics which are not adjacent to a verbal form, and which they are not strictly speaking adverbal, and as such they do not form a constituent with a verbal participle. We leave for the time the finite verb, and we concentrate on the auxiliary participle orders. And second, we want to show that clitics which can be shown to be strictly adverbal make up a constituent with the verb. So our idea, which was inspired by a comparison with Romance, about which Romance varieties, not Italian, but Romance varieties, actually this inspired us to see whether the situation in Bulgarian is also similar to some extent. Now, as far as compound forms are concerned, I give here 47A, B, C, just to show the clitic cluster. However, we have here a present tense auxiliary, which also participates in compound tense formation, but given that it is a clitic, it participates in the clitic cluster. So 47A, аз съм му го подарил, съм му го, forms a clitic, вие сте му го подарили, forms a clitic, сте му го, and той ми го е подарил, with A, the third person singular auxiliary following the entire pronominal cluster. So we agree with most other scholars that each of these clitics, be it pronominal or auxiliary, occupies a separate functional head. We do not know precisely, like I said, where exactly these heads are, but let's say for now that they are part of the extended projection of the verb. And so they merge as agreement projections, as many people have said, like agreement indirect object, and then the auxiliary clitic on top. Now, there is an argument which we are going to develop now called the interpolation argument. And actually, it has been discussed in Frank's, in Bošković, which are standard classic writers, scholars working on clitics, but I don't think this argument has been developed very well. So we are now going to develop it and see what effects it has on the position of clitics. Okay, now we can say some examples have been collected, but by us for the purposes of this talk. Okay, so what we can say here, looking at the examples in 48, is that the past participle cannot raise when it finds itself in the presence of a clitic cluster. It cannot, it must raise above the lowest aspectual adverbs. Here I illustrate only with dobre. That's why dobre cannot be found in front of it, but it cannot raise above, and it must raise above all the other adverbs. Okay, so you can say, аз съм го винаги много харесвал, ти си го напълно прозрял, you have completely understood it. Не сме им го все още показали, we still did not show it to them, and where you see the clitic cluster actually being interpolated by an adverb which appears in between it and the verbal participle. And the same is true for all the adverbs up to the hierarchy which we already saw, namely above dobre and rano, and optionally above the other adverbs like напълно, често, никога, etc. Interestingly, like we saw above, if we have an adverb like usually, which belongs to the higher functional field, or вероятно, probably a model adverb still higher than these, can never interpolate and can never split the clitic sequence from the verbal participle. Okay, so what we can say, given this data, is that the cluster aux, let's say present tense auxiliary, clitics, pronominal clitics, a third tense, a third person auxiliary, actually is located in this cutoff point between lower spectral field and the higher obiknoveno, model, etc. Field. And so this separates actually the two fields. Now in passive compound tenses, possibilities of interpolation are even richer, given that what we said, that the passive participle participle actually doesn't necessarily raise even above the lowest possible adverbs, rano and early. So we expect, as in 51D, тази привилегия му е рано отнета. We see that, добре описан, we see that these adverbs can actually interpolate. Okay, now we are going to show that Bulgarian clitics have the second option. No, namely, they have also the option of attaching to a verbal form with which they make an impenetrable constituent. And now we are going to look at compound tenses which contain non-clitic auxiliaries, because we saw that clitic auxiliaries are fixed around the two pronominal clitics, while the non-clitic auxiliary was actually is movable. So in 52 you see той му го беше вече дал, which in some which to a certain extent resembles the movement of the finite verb when it can raise must raise in fact above вече. But in the second order of the compound tense in 53 we see that actually беше precedes the pronominal complex mugo. So in this case we see that there are certain differences in terms of the possibility of adverb interpolation. Now the adverb can precede mugo and thus be inserted between the past tense auxiliary and the pronominal cluster, but it cannot interpolate between the pronominal cluster and the verbal participle. This we take to mean or to show that the clitic mugo and the participle make up a constituent. In other words, this constituent that we see here is a function of the movement of the participle. It is not a constituent that requires some fixed position of the verb with respect to the clitic. Rather, it is a constituent that results from the possible available movements of the participle across the auxiliary, across the adverbs. Now, once this constituent is formed, the sequence of clitics plus the L participle can optionally raise above each of the lower aspectual adverbs that the participle alone can cross over. And so for confirmation, you have a battery of examples from 44 to 48. So remember, we said that rano, that the participle must cross over rano, and we see here that mugodal, the entire complex, has crossed over rano, but we saw that the participle need not obligatorily raise across the other functional adverbs. So često, frequently, ošte, povečе, veče can all appear to interpolate. Okay, so this we give 59 gives the same dotted dashed lines as potential movement of this combination, this constituent clitics plus verb and with respect to all these adverbs. Okay, so 60 gives a kind of an extended template of the positions that we saw. This sign, mathematical sign equal, means that the clitics can lean prosodically either to a left constituent constituent or to a right. And in this case, the sign equal is to the left, while if it is to the right, then this shows prosodical orientation with respect to the following constituent. So this is how we distinguish, and it is a well-known denotation in clitic from proclitic clitics. Okay, so to summarize, there appear to be two fields accessible for clitics at merge in Bulgarian. A higher field, which is given in yellow, which allows for interpolation of the various spectral adverbs to the extent that the verbal participle can cross them over, and the lower adverbal field, which sticks with the verb and does not allow any interpolation. Having auxiliaries, having pronominal clitics as enclitic or as proclitic may seem to be a kind of contrast. However, it has been recognized, at least as long as early as Pancheva 2004, that Bulgarian clitics are not consistently enclitic or proclitic. They can be both. So they can be oriented either towards, if they are the highest lot, towards the first constituent, or they can be oriented towards the verb and they procliticize on the verb. So with respect to the prosodic domain, many people have exploited various possibilities to derive the left dependency of clitics, for example, as in 60xp, how it gets to adjoin, let's say, to the left of all the clitics. We would like to push to the maximum towards a syntactic explanation of the phenomenon, as you have probably understood. So according to us, syntax is fully responsible for the linear position of clitics in the sentence. So clitics do not move in phonology, and phonology doesn't even play a role, but what appears to be phonological dependency is actually resolved in syntax. Okay, now very briefly about a potential problem that we thought about while working. Like I said about Tobler-Musafia, namely that this is a special requirement which is typical for Bulgarian but not for other South Slavic languages, namely that clitics cannot be initial in their prosodic domain. Now, an apparent problem for the idea that clitics form a constituent with the participle may seem to be provided by 61, not 60, by 61, where we see that the clitic cluster following the non-clitic auxiliary beshe is separated from the participle by one lower adverb, implying that perhaps the clitic and the verb do not form a constituent. However, remember that we have postulated two slots or two fields for the clitics. And what we believe is going on in 61 is that the past tense auxiliary whose position was between the clitic cluster and the participle, beshedal, can optionally raise to this first position in order to avoid clitic initiality. So what is actually going on here is that when the past auxiliary moves, it actually moves around the higher clitic slot. If it were to move around the lower clitic slot, we would expect that interpolation would show up. And this is exactly what we see in 62, where we see that beshe is already separated it from the adverb, so it is in a higher position, while mugo and the verb form a constituent given that there cannot be any interpolation by an adverb. So it is not that the past tense auxiliary needs to move always, and this actually is a problem, because in some cases it is also the verb that can move. So this dal given that you see in 62 can optionally also move around the clitic cluster, but this is something that we still need to work on. Now, Zimmerling 2013, Zimmerling and Costa 2013, and Zimmerling to appear, and perhaps in other works, has convincingly shown that Bulgarian is a Wackernagel plus language, or an extended Wackernagel language. Old Bulgarian, much like Old Church Slavonic, was a second position clitic language, but according to Zimmerling, this second position is not lost. So Bulgarian is a rare European type in which we have both second position effects as well as clitic verb adjacency. And we fully agree, although we are not sure whether this second position slot is a fixed one, but we fully agree that there are second position effects, or a residue of a second position effect, which can be related to the requirement of non-initiality, that is to the Tobler-Musafia principle, which guides the Bulgarian complex. And maybe, so what we still need to understand is 63b, not only a past tense auxiliary, like I said, but also a participle dala can itself move, and we still do not understand how it moves, where it moves to, and what are the conditions, but it is clear that this has to be looked at better. Okay, so just to conclude, that Bulgarian, in contrast to the received wisdom, has these two types of positions, and one higher slot or field and one lower, which is next to the verb, left to the verb. And this actually finds a confirmation not only in Zimmerling's work, but also in work by our colleague from the Institute of Bulgarian Language, Svetlana Dimitrova, which actually showed that the position of the auxiliaries, aux1 and aux2, are quite flexible, and that aux1 can actually move from a lower position to this first position, where it is where it precedes the true clitics of Old Slavic, like the operator clitics, and then the rest of the clitic complex has not changed much over the time. So what really has changed is the position of the auxiliaries with respect to the clitic cluster, but not the clitic cluster itself, and not, of course, the relative order with respect to the verbal participle. So we believe to have shown that a similar situation was observed in Romance varieties, and we actually think that this Romance Slavic connection that we found can give us some interesting insight on the present, but also on the past of the Slavic languages. Thank you very much. Did you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Iliyana. Thank you, Guglielmo. It was definitely a great talk, and we have some, some 14 minutes for discussion.
Okay.
So questions are welcome.
Okay.
No,
Wait.
Vieni più vicino.
Da.
Ce la fai? Ecco qua.
Just one point. I especially welcome the consistent syntactic approach to clitic placement, since it's now customary to claim that something that one cannot explain in syntactic terms is called phonology or phonetics or some other mysterious words. And here the explanation is consistently syntactic in nature, whether the moved category, the verb, or some constituent, including the verb or the verbal particle, forms a constituent and has one or more available targets, as was shown brilliantly in this talk. Thank you. It's very convincing.
I certainly hope so. Yes, but I also very much appreciated your findings as well, which made me in the beginning think about what the motivation is to postulate a second position. And now with this comparison, we think that we actually found that the second position is not some phonological effect, but is actually something that happens in syntax and is a function of verb movement. Let me say that verb movement has not been investigated in Bulgarian. In Italian, the first verb movement book appeared in 1990 by Adriana Belletti, but Bulgarian and perhaps even Slavic in general still need to be treated better for in terms of verb movement, and also so this seems like a fruitful direction to proceed also with respect to clitics.
Yes, we have a question from Professor Lutikova, Ekaterina Lutikova.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a very inspiring, interesting talk. And I have two questions actually. The first one is about the purely syntactic account to Bulgarian clitics. So I'm wondering if you can explain the different positions of the auxiliary clitic cluster. So the third person singular auxiliary and other auxiliaries are located in different places. So can it be explained in syntax, or do we need prosody or phonology in this situation? And the second question is a bit more data question. I wonder if Bulgarian adverbals, like speech act adverbals, high adverbals, are indeed positioned as adverbs and not as parenthetical, because in Russian we have a lot of expressions which denote similar notions, but they are useless for syntactic arguing because they are parenthetical and they appear usually in the second position at the clause or in some other positions accessible for parentheticals. So is it so in Bulgarian too, or you are happy to have real speech act adverbals in their position? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. They can be parentheticals, but they need not be. For example, maybe I should have used честно, honestly, instead of честно казано, because this honestly speaking is much more ready for a parenthetical use. However, you need not have казано said, you can only say честно. And then it is very difficult to make it parenthetical. Аз честно не обичам да плувам. For example, I don't need, if it is an entire phrase as česno kazano, you can, maybe this is, it's more frequent use even, but it can also be non-parenthetical. And this is an interesting point. I also thought about that. We haven't investigated all of the adverbs, and we are working towards a more fine-grained hierarchy. So these are only preliminary results. Yes.
No, can I ask something to Katerina concerning the putative parenthetical usage? If you were to combine two high adverbs like unfortunately and probably, where, for example, in something like unfortunately, we are probably leaving early today, could you possibly use them in the reverse order, like probably, unfortunately, we are going to leave early today. Whether, if you could reverse them, then you would have one good reason to think of them as being on a par parenthetically. If it's difficult, then maybe even what looks like parenthetical might be betraying a really order between these two, like evaluative adverb and an epistemic adverb, like probably. So I don't know. It takes time to, to concentrate and see these ordering, whether they actually obtain or not. So something to be thought about.
To answer the first question, I don't know. It is a very difficult question about the different height of the two auxiliaries. Actually, many people have wondered about that. Migdalski, for example, proposes that this a auxiliary occupies a tense, while the other auxiliaries occupy a higher position. But for us, it is important to see it in combination with adverbs, so we have to think about, because the adverbs are higher, obviously, and they together with this a, they are in a position which can be separated by higher aspectual adverbs, by the lower aspectual adverbs. For example, той е вече дошъл, той го е вече видял. So this is it in Russian. It is probably different, I don't know, but in any case, they are different in terms of height, and it's not really clear whether actually there is a verb movement like е дошъл, one could say, but then if we say that the verb adjoins to the a, right adjoins to the a, then we are losing the interpolation argument. So there is no adjunction. So it's a separate head, functional head, but it needs to be identified. We don't know if you want to say.
No.
I because I know of arguments that this higher auxiliary is indeed situated lower where other auxiliaries are. So it's an ellipsis argument, or if I remember correctly.
Yes,
so,
the ellipsis. Right. Maybe you can answer about ellipsis, because...
Well, ellipsis is always a bit delicate to handle, because you can, it's not clear that it always elides or deletes constituents. You can actually elide a remnant, which is made up by more constituents. So it has to be looked into And we haven't done a proper analysis in terms of ellipsis yet.
In Bulgarian. You remember probably from Stepanovic's work on ellipsis in Serbo-Croatian, which was used as an argument that they occupy different functional heads. Yes, yeah. But this is something that we
and in Italian too, better. It seems that proclitics, certain proclitics allow for a second proclitic to delete with a verb. And I mean, when you coordinate, you can use one high clitic plus a coordination of low clitic verb plus low clitic verb, suggesting that they don't form a cluster, but they sit in two separate, I mean, Keynes' work on French as well has done, but it's, I mean, it takes time to discover that in Bulgarian, whether it's possible to extend. We had looked at, but it wasn't clear. It wasn't clear.
This is,
Yeah. Thank you. May I ask you to return the example number 18 from Old Spanish?
Wait a moment to see. Yeah, number 18. Yeah. We are still in sharing. Yeah, 18.
Yes.
Is this one?
Yes, I just wanted to add that according to many descriptions, Old Spanish and probably some Old Italian dialects belong to nearly the same type as modern Bulgarian. That is something resembling to P clitic placement plus verb clitic adjacency with some exceptions. So here one could claim that the clitic law in 18a sits in 2p after the complementizer care. And probably Cantas veces in Galician is an instance of 2p placement if we count not the position of the functional categories, but the Cephas position of the first spelled out constituents. So what makes 2p is not necessarily deep syntax. It's a rather shallow constraint. Probably, I don't know, but maybe.
I see. Well, that remains to. I'm not a specialist of. I simply followed, Beninca and Tortora analysis of these cases as being located very high. Of course, if you look at Old French, Old Italian, Old not the West but the East, old medieval East Romance varieties, they are slightly different from Old Spanish, and you better know. I mean, you know better than us about the fact that they were verb second, but also verb third or verb fourth even, depending on the variety. Different things functioned as the first element. For example, coordination in Old French allowed for proclises, whereas coordination, the E of Italian, allowed both proclises and enclises. So it did not necessarily count as a first position element. And depending on the the variety, different things could, count as first element, like even hanging topics or topicalization, but not in Old Italian, only focus counted. So that requires really to look into each type and see, I don't know, it's a very complex case. You may be right that, these were not possible, I think, in Old Italian, these cases. So that remains really to to be seen. They are not.
And hanging topics are not a suitable host for Bulgarian clitics.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is there is. I mean, it is true when they say that the prosodic domain, intonational prosodic domain, actually is the CP. This is Frank's, because if hanging topics are outside of the CP, then perhaps this is the reason why we...
Except for the special one, ask Mrs. P.
Except for the special one, yes.
There is one special...
which is not clear whether it is a hanging topic, but
still it's nominative. It's nominativus pendens. So it looks like... yeah, maybe there is more than one hanging topic.
Yeah.
You know, one has to distinguish. Yeah. I mean, it's both. They are nominativus pendens because it's us and then me. But the other us that you had,
the hanging topic, the real hanging
topic would not allow for a clitic to follow.
For a second position.
For a second position. So that needs to be looked into. I don't know in Russian whether you have nominativus pendens.
Well, we have something like that, and we had exact counterparts in Old Russian. Old Russian was a Wakarnaga language with second P clitics, so it's not that instructive here. Sorry. We still have a couple of minutes before we proceed to the closing procedure. Sorry. Well, I would like to ask Guglielmo and Iliyana about the Romance type word order systems. I completely agree with the analysis that the clitics, Romance and Balkanic, say modern Greek clitics, form a constituent with the verb and raised to some available positions. And there are normally more than one position, even in modern Romance languages. This is completely true, but this should be a universal mechanism. I wonder why are word order systems like modern Italian or modern French so rare outside Europe. This is a puzzle, I think. Probably the mechanism of clitic verb adjacency and making up a constituent is one thing, and well, number of positions which do not constrain the placement of this verb clitic constituent in terms of left border or right border. This is a different thing, a different parameter. So that's why it's difficult to find an exact
counterpart. Yeah. Well, as I said, one really has to look deeply into each language. For example, I mean, verbs look more mobile than adverbs because and DPs and PPs also. DPs, like say, if one thinks of Hagemann's work on Flemish, West Flemish, she showed that you can have the sequence subject, dative, and accusative pronouns, not clitics, but tonic pronouns, at different heights, interspersed at different heights within the clause
as arguments.
So they also seem to be mobile. But again, crucially, it's adverbs that are the flag posts showing these movements, these different positioning. And they seem, except for cases of focalization of adverbs or topicalization even in some languages, they seem in the neutral order to come in a particular sequence. But again, that has to be looked into, and I don't know. Not much has been. I don't know about Russian, whether I mean, Russian is proverbially, after Roman Jakobson's work and other people's work, taken to be very free word order language, you know, where any combination of verb, subject, object, but also Italian, if you look at Italian, you can have OVS, OSV, any combination, you know, but you see that when you have OVS or OSV, you really have a topic, focus, verb.
Yeah.
And they are special orders. So one again should look into and try. It's not easy. I don't say that it's easy to, you know, districate the information part of the syntax from, you know, the more neutral. And especially if one looks at so many different languages across the world, it's even more difficult and more tricky and full of traps. We are surrounded by traps. And even Italian, I discovered late that I was trapped by the order of two adverbs until I discovered that one of them incorporated into the other. And it's very simple. It's my più, where you have never, always, so never any longer, whereas you should expect any longer, never, because if never is the opposite of always, and you have no any more or no longer always, you should expect no longer, never. But you find never and no longer. However, notice that in French you have both orders, jamais plus and plus jamais. And crucially, both in Italian and in French, you cannot put any verb in between jamais plus or mai più. You can put something in between in French. You cannot tell in Italian because only in Old Italian you found più mai, like Foscolo. That's a famous poem by Foscolo. But in modern Italian, and there you have evidence that they make up a constituent. So it's a real trap, you know.
And the biggest question is, who is attracting what? Are the clitics attracting the verb or the verb attracts? So maybe we should end on this note, which is a very important research perspective, which you also discuss. That's why I am quoting it now.
Dear colleagues, it's time to close the discussion, and the words "my più" are really sad. I kindly ask, well, non rivedrò mai più, so I would like that we welcome our plenary speakers once more. Thank you once again for a great talk.